still hadn't found a place to live in Dublin. Half-hour train ride.
It's like the weird reuse because then you're
She's out in the county.
I mean, not now.
At least you believe me, I just go for one week.
Is it weird? Like,
This is quite a setup. This was, I believe, warehouse.
They're around, they're kind of like, they're not like at practice all the time, it's like I'm traveling. It's kind of a nice transition, in the fall, like, not being there at all. Like, just kind of getting
Hey, how are you, Adam? Thank you so much for coming. It's good to see you. I want you to meet one of our translators. On Monday night, yeah. They've been reading your emails and hearing about Mercury.
yeah. That's so great.
It's a great ministry. Hannah's graduated. I know. I don't want her to leave. It's the worst when you first meet a student senior year and you're like,
I know. When you take a class, you like love finally.
better than never being at all.
That's true.
How are you? Good. I'm so glad you're here. Don't be afraid to come up front.
Yeah. Front row students.
We should, you wanna try to fly the same plane? Yeah.
There you are. I ran through a propellant.
So let me just say
Round hat. Oh my God, yeah, and I was just wondering, I've been flying to this, I've got some dealing there, and just wondering.
it's a killer.
I'm here till, tomorrow.
For videotape.
To go all the way.
Are we ready?
Yeah. Oh, I'm in.
Emily, the due date is tomorrow.
That's right.
What is?
Okay, so there's something I'm emailing you. So once it goes out into space.
Oh, okay.
It helps that I wrote something earlier, so I'll adapt
Put it up.
No, she was. How is it though? I just more the performance out there.
Mike, we should join you in
Nobody knows.
What? No, I was thinking the same thing.
I'm going on.
Yeah, no, I should. I want you to meet Maria. This Maureen saw there, add percentage.
I have to
I've
work
seen
with
that.
teaching Ellen and
Yes, obstructed view.
He's you're at
So there's many grades, so a lot of us know him from different grades. My friend. You did not go to school. Wait till February.
No,
Yeah, 22. I'm 25. And also, yeah, I had to go to university. No, like Britain's sophomore, James.
Somehow,
Other Quinn.
when there's a lost
It's been another year, right?
get rid of the chair.
Oh, yeah. You had met him. A lot of us have to tame.
I want to see a video. But Liz looked like banana.
You know, when the actors come in, I train them on how to do transitions.
You can always move over one if you're
Well, I train them. Walk behind chairs, step to the side, arms involved, and step forward. I walked up and sat right down. I didn't do that. And then I would say the title of the play, onto the translator, and then each of us says our character. I went right, I said the title of the play, then the writer, and then I started writing this, and I stopped at the character. Everybody else did great. I'm a good director. I'm a terrible actor. Everybody else did it right.
I think, by the way,
And Andre did have a first page.
you told me that's incredible.
Hi, here comes the next one. I'll massage you. That's sweet. You know Maddie, this is Bill, and Emily. They're from my sport class. He also was in our office. That's my savior. He does everything. And this is Emily and Maddie and the lovely lady Regina, who I don't know. What's her name?
What was the context?
Just like like fix everything. I said, do you know this person? You were so good, Connie. You were great in that part. And it's not an easy part.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't.
I concur, you were great in that.
He read from a play. He had to take knowledge and it was quite crazy. It was really yeah, we'll put you up for the
I found out.
Yes.
apparently you're famous about
Yeah, it's a lot of student theater, but they really like to both in the
I pretty love it. Got it.
We're still working on it.
So good afternoon all. My name is Ian Welcome. I'm the director of the Franklin Humanities Institute, and it's a great pleasure to welcome all of you here, and to welcome you also on behalf of the Theater Studies Department, and to welcome Joe Roach back to Yale. You back to Duke.
Four-letter words.
Four-letter words. Yes, they're both blue. Joe's been here a number of times. Was here a few years ago for a fantastic conference that Maureen Quilligan, my department, English department, organized and gave a tremendous talk at that occasion. And you've been, as so many of us know, just sort of a founding intellectual figure for us across a range of fields within performance studies, within theater studies, thinking about acting, in the elaboration of our thought about the Atlantic world, our relationship to thinking about how cultures of death work. It really is an incredible delight and an honor, Joe, to welcome you back and to look forward to this chance of hearing from you, hearing about the work that you've been pursuing recently, and to look forward to conversations together with you. So thank you for being here. We're absolutely thrilled. I want to turn now to my good colleague, Claire Constacon, from Theatre Studies, to give Joe a proper formal introduction.
Thank you all for coming. I know it's such a hectic week, so each and every one of you is completely valued. Your presence here today is really appreciated. As I give some introductory remarks, I'm going to pass around 2 of Joe's books in case people want to take a peek at them. And then they have these reminder post-it notes. They go back to the department. So you can return them to me, or you can return them to Phil Watson, and he'll bring them back for us. So you can kind of pass them different directions if you want. It is indeed an honor and a pleasure to introduce Joseph Roach, Sterling Professor of English and Director of Theatre Studies at Yale University. As a stage director, some of his productions include Psycho Hamlet, Shakespeare versus Hitchcock, Who's Going to Win, and Henry 5.1. And this spring he will be directing a production of Richard III. Will that have a fancy title too, or is it yet? Richard III, straight up Richard III. Professor Roach's academic work cuts across a variety of disciplines in both the arts and humanities, sciences and social sciences, and beyond. As a theater historian, performance studies theorist, and stage director, he sees the performing human body as central to any understanding of the historical and cultural contexts through which that body moves in space and time. In his remarks during a talk at the Mellon School of Theater and Performance Research at Harvard last summer, Professor Roach emphasized that it is the experience of making performance that is paramount. Genre, medium, scale do not matter, quote, so long as performance heightens the ambient consciousness of the speaker and the listener, end quote. At that symposium, the organizer, Martin Puchner, a formidable scholar himself, referred to Joe Roach as, quote, the most influential theater studies scholar in the United States. His groundbreaking books in the field, The Player's Passion, 1985, Cities of the Dead, 1996, and It, 2007, examine respectively the science of acting, the global circulation of performance, and that ineffable quality of celebrity. Exploring topics like memory and corporeal performance in Cities of the Dead, theatricalization of the body, including psychology and physiology in The Player's Passion, and cultural history and human charisma in It. The historical depth, slicing through time periods, and international breadth, cutting across continents, cultures, and ethnicities of his work is remarkable, and combines methodologies and epistemological inquiries of both theater history and performance studies, while creatively engaging other disciplines. Dr. Roach has received awards for his books from the MLA, the Modern Languages Association, ASTR, American Society for Theater Research, and NYU's prestigious Joe E. Calloway Prize. He was awarded an honorary doctorate from the University of Warwick in England and a Lifetime Distinguished Scholar Award from the American Society for Theater Research. His Distinguished Achievement Award from the Andrew Mellon Foundation funded his pioneering World Performance Project at Yale that he will speak about today. And in October, just this year, he was inducted into the Academy, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, which is a huge honor, well-deserved. If there were a Nobel Prize in the humanities, Joe Roach would win. Though he and I have never been at the same university, Professor Roach has been one of my mentors since graduate school, and he has been a generous advisor to countless graduate students and young scholars. He has trained and mentored the very best in our field, both at early and advanced stages of their careers. One of the first texts I was assigned in my doctoral program was his co-edited Critical Theory and Performance, originally published in 1992, a collection of essays by leading scholars through which performance theories, which were exploding in the postmodern era of the early 1990s, were reorganized and freshly articulated. The volume has maintained its freshness and influence through new editions over the past 2 decades. And Joe has always been there for me personally with advice, encouragement, and honest yet gentle criticism. Professor Roach has consistently illuminated where the field has been and where it is headed. He has a wonderful ability to simultaneously look back with clarity and look forward with vision. And that is why he is both a scholarly and professional beacon to so many. His work is well known and respected, not only in theater studies and performance studies, but in English, history, psychology, gender studies, ethnic studies, and beyond. He is a consummate humanist and also one of the most genuinely gracious and good people you will ever meet. Dr. Roach will most likely accuse me of hyperbole, or even worse, of misapplying the fabulous theory of charisma and celebrity he historically excavates and discursively explicates in his book, It. But taking that risk, I wish to posit that Joe himself has it. To use eloquent words from his own work to describe that quality he possesses, I quote, "A light seems to shine not only on him, but also from within him. Every witness can take some pleasure in attributing this to supernatural origins or simply to genius. It is the easily perceived, but hard to define quality, possessed by abnormally interesting people. Poets have it, saints have it, actors must have it, or they won't work very much. Well, believe it or not, some scholars have it too, and Joe Roach is one of them, the best of them, and we welcome him warmly to Duke today."
Thank you for that extraordinary introduction, Claire. Claire is one of those scholars who makes it worthwhile. I'm actually speaking today in my role as impresario and a director. And the issue I want to talk about is the melding of the humanities and the arts in a research relationship where there are research outcomes. And I preface my remarks that way by going back to 2007, the last time I was here at Duke, and I just received a grant from the Mellon Foundation to do the World Performance Project. And I promised at that time that when I was finished with the grant, I would come back and report, because there was a great deal of animated interest in my project here, but there was also a good bit of good old Tar Heel skepticism. I welcomed that, and I really feel honored to be invited back to give that report that's been 6-7 years in the making. The results I report were mixed. Some justified, I think, the animated interest you expressed. Others justified the skepticism. And I want to be forthright about what I think worked and what didn't. In essence, what I tried to do with the project was to apply the methods of performance studies to the problems of teaching and research across the humanities and the arts together. But I wanted to do that with a boost from not the methodologies of science, but the sociability of science, putting together teams of thinkers and artists and writers who could work on projects as scientists do together, and then write up the results together as scientists do, without claiming anything like the rigors of empiricism of the sciences. The first artist that I invited to join the World Performance Project at Yale was John ONeill, who was founder of the Free Southern Theater and field coordinator for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in the day. And John, as an inspiration to me, we worked together with the Tulane Law School on environmental law and environmental justice and performances around that when I was teaching in New Orleans. And so when I got the grant, I wanted to have John start us off. And one of the reasons I wanted to have John bring his wonderful character, Junebug Jabo Jones, to us was that Junebug's granddaddy was a preacher man, and he had excellent advice for Junebug on public speaking. And I've taken that advice to heart. And Junebug's granddaddy told Junebug that when you talk to the people, you've got to do 3 things. First, you got to tell them what you're going to tell them. Then you tell them. Then you tell them what you done told them. My talk today has 3 parts. The part where I tell you what I'm going to tell you is short, a part 2 where I tell you it necessarily is going to be longer. And altogether we'll do 40 minutes. And when we come to Don't Look Back, which is my version of the Orpheus myth set in the Teen-A-Rama dance parties of the 1960s, we'll be almost at the end. So what I'm going to tell you. What you might reasonably ask at the outset, do I think is a new Poetics? You had a chance to read the October 2010 issue of PMLA, special topic, Literary Criticism for the 21st Century. You might have noticed that I'm at a bit of a dust-up with my esteemed colleague, Jonathan Culler at Cornell, co-editor with Kathy Carruth of the issue. My article is titled Performance, the Blunders of Orpheus, and it proposes what I call an ambient poetics, founded on performance, literary and otherwise. And it recuperates mimesis in the name of the Orphic, based on looking back, or at least looking around in order to move forward. Or the cue for performance comes from something prior, as well as from something expected. And there I adapt the idea of Erich Auerbach in Mimesis and elsewhere of figura, which has similar properties. Kathy was more generous in her response, I'm glad to say, in understanding my point that literary criticism of the 21st century, just like literature itself, has to involve more than just reading and writing, though it has to involve those, of course. Anyone who wants to go forward to write discursively about performance should be able to look back on prior performances, including preferably the experience of having made performances. And here, as Claire pointed out in her introduction, it isn't a matter of genre, it isn't a matter of medium, it isn't a matter of scale. An embodied recitation of a poem is plenty if the performance heightens the ambient consciousness of the speaker and the listener too. So, for example, I get even the English majors on their feet when I teach at Yale. And of course I offer English 338, Poetics of Performance, which is oral interpretation of literature. I start with this exercise. It's called Extinct Sounds. And this quotes the description. We're losing certain sounds because of our rapidly changing post-industrial environments. Collect a particular sound that you believe is on the verge of extinction. What kinds of cultural and personal meanings have become attached to this sound? What could its impending extinction mean for the world that includes it? How will it be remembered after it is gone? Now, I get a lot of versions of Donkey Kong and of the AOL screen when you dial it up and that sort of thing. And then the students ask me what my extinct sound is, and the one that is the closest to my heart comes from the office of my the person who shares the hall with me, Louise Glegg, the poet. And Louise doesn't use computers. She uses an old Remington typewriter. Yeah. And so the sound of the typewriter from her office is music to my ears. And I can't help but dramatize the sounds that I hear, because Louise is a fluent typist. And when I hear her going at top speed with the carriage return back, I know it's something like dumping a boyfriend or telling off. And it's pouring out. But then I hear click, 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 click. And then I know that a poem is happening. I think at that moment of Louise's soul-searing memoir of anorexia, Dedication to Hunger, which is a section of descending figure. It begins quietly in certain female children, the fear of death, taking as its form dedication to hunger. Because a woman's body is a grave, it will accept anything. I remember lying in bed at night, touching the soft, digressive breasts, touching at 15 the interfering flesh that I would sacrifice until the limb were free of blossom and subterfuge. I felt what I feel now, aligning these words. It is the same need to perfect, of which death is the mere byproduct. slick. It's not all gloom and doom. I have a prosody exercise that puts together unexpected couples. I call it odd couples. So for instance, Frost stopping by the woods in a snowy evening will scan to Fernando's hideaway. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow, with snow. In the second verse, I do the tango, actually. The poetics I have in mind is predicated on the integration of the arts into the humanities with methodological help from the sciences, as I mentioned, challenging the mind-body dualism that is the bane of Western metaphysics and the root cause of dysfunction of arts research in universities. Make that the root cause of dysfunction in universities. Mind versus body, theory versus practice, head versus heart. Enough already. Think of all that's at stake in maintaining mind-body dualism, led by ferocious socio-economic imperatives to maintain the strict division of mental and manual labor, on which all value is ultimately calculated. Confounding the mental and manual, the corporeal and the intellectual, I propose to challenge the performing arts to start pulling their own weight in terms of research outcomes. And this varies from campus to campus, and on this campus it may be way ahead. And no solution fits all. But I think in general there's an unrealized potential in the performing arts for closing into research outcomes, because the heavy lifting is done when the productions are mounted. The best way I could think of doing that is by documenting these ideas by referencing the production and research activities of a project that brought in companies that funded indigenous work, documented them all, archived them as videos and audio recordings, and buttressed them with seminars and papers by experts, and then published the results of the research at the end. That was the World Performance Project, which ended last summer. I'm now embarked on the third stage of a Mellon Grant, Interdisciplinary Performance Studies at Yale, the structure of which is 4 two-year postdocs, and the object of which is called Live Arts and Media Studies. I have an apology here, and I want to exculpate the Franklin Humanities Center, and especially Hannah, who is perfect. I failed to load into the files, the digital files that back up my videos. So alas, in a paper that deals extensively with motion, I can't show you the videos, but I take some solace in the fact that I know I'm in a room with people who can imagine motion. They do it all the time. Before it happens, after it has happened, they see it in their mind's eye. And I'm hoping they're going to help me out. I'm not a technophobe, I'm just a techno-klutz. Although the World Performance Project works in all the performance genres, including performance art, and theater and drama, I'm going to emphasize dance in this talk today. In part, that's because the artistic director of the project, Emily Coates, is formerly of the New York City Ballet. She was Mikhail Baryshnikov's principal partner for 4 years in White Oaks Ballet, and she's danced for Twyla Tharp and Yvonne Rainer. Although our productions have been drawn from all over the world, I want to emphasize our African and African diasporic connections, which have consistently given us a theoretical and practical basis for our writing. It's our hypothesis that Afro-diasporic forms really provide the mainstream, not the margins, in the American theater, the North American theater, and of much of the world theater beyond. The key metaphor and practical performance technique of our research is polyrhythm, or cross rhythm, which is simultaneously a musical and a kinesthetic structure. It is also a deeply cultural one, indebted to African and Afro-Caribbean performance, but now ambient, penetrating our senses and preparing them for, among other things, the contemporary experience of cybersurfing across multiple media platforms. Kinesis, which means motion or change in Aristotle, is the root word of kinescope, of cinema, kinetic, active, as opposed to latent or potential, and kinesthetic, which means the fine-grained quality of the movement. And here, when I say the fine-grained quality of the movement, I think of an inspirational figure in my education in dance, Annalisa at Washington University in St. Louis, who just passed recently. And I want to remember her because when she would say the quality of the movement, she could move her body in such a way to tell you that she was talking about Limon as opposed to Graham, or Graham opposed to Hawkins. She could make a distinction between those techniques just in a gesture, and she could do this into her 92nd year. We have just a few propositions. One of them is that movement in postmodernity and post-postmodernity is slippery, but we also take from Anna Singh, the book called Friction, an ethnography of global connection, the idea that it isn't all slipperiness, that there's a friction that slows things down, and sometimes it slows them down for the good. But in our terms, kinesis plus friction is a kind of new mimesis, a new term that we evoke in place of the older one. We find ourselves saying that polyrhythm mimics polyvocality, that the rhythmic cadences suggest multiple voices, and that polyvocality mimics hospitality, a welcoming of other voices. All right, part 2. Now I'm going to tell you. What I'm telling you is that polyrhythm must be embodied to be understood. This was featured most vividly in our repertoire by Peru Negro, the Afro-Peruvian national ethno-performance troupe, looked at from the perspective of world dance, and the potential masterpiece of intangible heritage, looked at from the perspective of UNESCO's Intangible Heritage Initiative, cultural division, and at once the ultimately local, now tourist-trapping nightclub act from the dives of Lima, looked at from the sentiently ambient critical perspective of performance studies. We were the first stop for Perro Negro on its first North American bus and truck tour. The performance packed the house with Peruvian Americans and others. One family came to New Haven from Virginia because they couldn't afford to stay in a hotel. They just turned around and drove back home the night of the performance. They danced in the aisles. They shouted back to the actors and dancers on the stage. And I'm glad to be able to tell you that the Yale rep hadn't seen anything quite like that for a while. Hasn't since. But in the symposium and critique, we followed up with a conversation called Intangible Cultural Heritage and the Global Performance Industry. And already you can sense the friction. The participants were Juan Murillo, artistic director of Perro Negro, and also an international restaurateur with franchises in Lima and in Los Angeles. Pamela McKean, vice president and booking agent of CAMI, that's Columbia Artist Management, Inc., the toughest management corporation out there. She's the professional booker. She's the butts in seats guru. Mary Lou Oleski, executive director of the International Arts and Ideas Festival in New Haven. Heidi Carolyn Feldman of San Diego State University, author of Black Rhythms of Peru, Reviving African Musical Heritage in the Black Pacific. Jill Lane, Department of Spanish and Portuguese at NYU, and author of Blackface Cuba. And Diana Taylor, also of NYU, the Department of Performance Studies, representing the Hemispheric Institute for Politics and Performance. The symposium was invited to address the performance of Perro Negro in its Yale context from the perspective of the 2003 UNESCO Protocols for Intangible Cultural Heritage. Quoting the protocols, those performing arts, oral expressions, social practices, rituals, festive events, knowledge and skills that communities recognize as part of their cultural heritage. Intangible heritage is the third of three parts of UNESCO's World Heritage Initiative. The first part was tangible heritage, the built environment, the slave forts at Gorée, West African coast, Robben Island, Angkor. The second part was natural heritage, the Amazon basin, the Galapagos Island complex, and the like. But the third part is the most interesting to me, and I think probably to many artists and to many humans, and that is intangible heritage, which consists of performing arts, rituals, culinary arts, masterpieces of oral expression, even although they are not written down anywhere, dance forms, works so important that they belong not only to people who create them, but to all humankind, quoting the language of UNESCO. You can probably sense the friction building up there. The paradox of intangible cultural heritage resonates in what was its slogan. It's since been removed from the website, but it was up then. Cultural diversity, a new universal ethic. It's like Yogi Berra, when you come to the fork in the road, take it. The questions we asked the panelists included who owns culture and who benefits from its preservation. This was not a neutral issue at Yale at this moment, and consistent with our Orphic Poetics, which means honoring both history and memory, we had to look back in order to look forward. The university was then at legal dagger points with the government and people of Peru over the ownership of the so-called treasures of Machu Picchu, the artifacts and human remains from the Incan mountaintop palace complex site, crated up and sent back to New Haven by Hiram Bingham in 1911 to 1915. They remained in the Peabody Museum at Yale until just last year, on loan for purposes of study. Until, that is, Peru wanted them back and Yale resisted. Negotiations which we were promised would be triumphantly concluded by the time we opened Peru Negro had just broken down in acrimony. An acrimony, I must add, not helped by the concurrent release of Indiana Jones and the Mystery of the Crystal Skull, which was shot on the Yale campus and explicitly underscored in the most obnoxiously racist way possible the link between Indiana Jones and Hiram Bingham as wanton pillagers of Andean cultural patrimony. So questions crackled in the air at the symposium around the performance of Peru Negro, local, national, global. What does heritage mean and who owns it? Can it be shared? Can it be preserved without being commodified, without being bus and trucked, exactly what we were doing? How to negotiate the conflict in the world today between geographical mobility and cultural belonging. What does it mean for us to curate such a performance, using the term of art which is now prevalent? We posited that polyrhythm, the fabulous co-creation of world historical diaspora and creolization, established poetic conditions favorable to the production of polyvocality, different voices put together in the same room, which we offered as part of our hospitality to our guests, as indispensable to our project as food, and almost as indispensable as drink. Peru Negro was one event in a repertoire of 40+ similar contextualized performances, collaborating with other departments in the arts and humanities, in commissioning or booking scholarly and creative work in theater, dance, performance art, and joining forces with the Yale Rep to produce a season called No Boundaries. Never intended by the World Performance Project as ends in themselves, performances included Cuban-American stand-up comedy, installation art, slam poetry, readings of Arabic plays in translation, Czech dance theater, Singaporean storytelling, and so forth. Movement, Movement across distances, across time, across boundaries is the key to everything that we have been trying to do with this project. And because dance is historically the least well established of the performing arts at Yale, and I know parenthetically that the first year of the project, Duke established a dance major, which was inspiring to us. It has also proved to be the least resistant to being moved. Movement in this sense means a transition into a research paradigm where production is not the end point of the effort, but the provocation. This, we hope, is timely in world historic terms as well as local ones. Our working hypothesis about contemporary performance, kinesis is the new mimesis, is that the arts proliferate within the mediated and multicultural languages of transnational space. Expressive movement is becoming a lingua franca for us and so many, basis of a newly experienced affective cognition and corporeal empathy. Mimesis, rooted in drama, imitates action. Kinesis embodies it. In order to be what it is, polyvocality, like justice, must be done. It must be performed, actualized, and embodied. But, of course, that can't happen without friction. I just want to make a quick run through some of our repertoire so you get a sense of the scope and the comparison, contrast, and juxtapositions that we tried to put together, not only event standing alone, but event linking to other events in the series. Coco Fusco brought us A Room of One's Own, ironically playing on Virginia Woolf's essay in a performance art critique of post-9/11 women's roles in extraordinary rendition and interrogation, enhanced interrogation techniques. We brought Mark Bermudi Joseph and his autobiographical hip-hop performance. Veiled Monologues, which developed explicit sexual ethnographies of Muslim women as told by Muslim women, performed by Muslim women, and filtered by a Dutch secular stage director turned amateur ethnographer who ended up in our symposium in a screaming match with a member of our faculty in Middle Eastern Studies. Tim Crouch, England, a site-specific drama about organ donation involving first world recipients and third world donors. It's written to take place in an art gallery, so we use the Yale Center for British Art because the metaphor of moving art from place to place is slowly and inexorably and devastatingly transferred to the idea of moving organs out of one body and placing them into another body. And Witness to Ruins, the Mapa Teatro of Bogota brought us a Colombian multimedia performance with a live culinary arts demo attached to it. And in this production, the civic authorities in Bogota decided to raise an entire neighborhood, El Cartucho. It was a historic neighborhood from the 18th century, but it had been blighted and become a crime area. And so over a 2-week period, the residents were removed and the bulldozers and the wrecking balls came in. The whole area was flattened to create a park in the urban center of Bogota. And Mapa Teatro video documented this raising of the city and the displacement of the people in it, interviewed the displaced citizens, and made a video performance out of that. But while this performance is happening, one of the great chefs of El Cartucho is preparing a meal, and the theater fills with the wafted aromas of these extraordinary spices, a meal that is then consumed by the audience at the end of the performance. The Rude Mechanicals from Austin, Texas brought us The Method Gun. The Method Gun, and for any acting teachers here, I underscore this, The Method Gun is about a company of method actors turning homicidal. After being in rehearsal for Tennessee Williams' Streetcar Named Desire and nothing else for 7 years. I don't want realism, I want magic. Maria Harris, the Spanish video performance artist, her murder mystery solo performance with 12 dismembered Barbie dolls. And then a commissioned piece, Nameless Forest, a multimedia collaboration between Dean Moss, African-American choreographer, and Sungwon Chun, Korean sculptor and installation artist. Much else besides. I want to focus on one of these offerings to expand a bit on the treatment of it. Important provocative moment for us was the visit of Slobby, the Farm in the Cave studio theater from Prague. Based in Prague, the company derives movement and music theater scenarios from folk materials. The piece they brought us, The Song of the Immigrant, or Slobby, sets texts taken from letters sent back home by Czech nationals displaced by condition of globalized labor, matching the haunted imagery of their words to old Ruthenian and Ukrainian folk tunes, and adding a hyperkinetic corporeal score of sinuous movement, sometimes on the verge of abstraction, sometimes directly pantomimic, always evocative, and frequently pointed. Slobby plays on the etymological connection between the words Slav and slave. But what does it mean in this context to declare that there are no boundaries? We saw ourselves, guests as well as hosts, as falling in among the agents of globalization as well as its discontents, schlepping the folk material out of the Slovakian villages and onto the world stage. By using the phrase post-global performance, we acknowledged with mixed feelings how unsurprising it has become to us and others that something as locally particular, as intimately hard-won as a choreographic style can now circulate with the celerity of accessory objects, luxury objects, or cheap labor. Looking back in order to move forward, we acknowledge that we are complicit in making diversity a new universal poetic ethic, but not without friction. The boundaries we denied in naming our season No Boundaries came back to haunt us, or more accurately to bite us, in stand-up tragedian Taylor Mack's one-man show, The Best or the Beast of Taylor Mack, which he tailored, pun intended there, to riff on the absurdity of our fatuous attempt to brand our work as No Boundaries. No boundaries, he screamed. You at Yale may have no boundaries, but I have boundaries. But we gave as good as we got. Tavia Nyong'o of NYU Performance Studies came back at Taylor in the symposium. Taylor started in the village living rooms, now plays regional reps with a somewhat subdued piece. Tavia titled his symposium talk, The Gentrification of Freakishness. The most complicated event we attempted was a festival of international dance, 5 works from 3 choreographers with 3 North American and 1 world premiere. In conjunction with the idea that kinesis is the new mimesis, we thought that the human body cannot be wholly abstracted, bidden or unbidden. It will signify. To move your body is to tell your story, and the older you get, the more stories you have to tell. We brought 3 choreographers together for a week of performances, workshops, talkbacks, and symposia. Yasmin Goder, an Israeli-trained dancer trained at NYU. Opio Akach, a Kenyan who works in Nairobi and Paris. And Yvonne Rainer, a major figure in the Judson Dance Theater, focal point of the downtown scene, the development of postmodern dance in the 1960s and 70s. We provided hospitality in the enlarged sense I'm proposing here, tending the kinesthetic needs and desires of our guests, and they to one another's. In the course of their mutual explorations, they discovered deep connections as well as deep differences in their works and beliefs. First off, singular sensation here pictured looked anything but hospitable and polyvocal only in the sense of cacophony. Emily Coates, the artistic director of World Performance Project, wrote, "Singular sensation eventually erupts into dark Dionysian chaos, slipping and sliding around in substances which included dried spaghetti, red jello, and green paint. The dancers alternate between moving in solidarity and beating each other up. Reaching energetic levels far outside the realm of the pedestrian, her dancers lash out and recoil, inflate and deflate, slide toward each other, and scurry away. Physically distressed by the end, their trauma seems real." End quote, Emily Coates. In conversation with Yvonne, Yasmin recalled the minimalist impact of the residual Judson Dance Theater from her years at NYU. But in the talkback, all of our performances include talkbacks, our audiences, marking Yasmin's Israeli identity, wanted to read the choreography of singular sensation as an allegory of Israeli-Palestinian relations, locked in a bitter embrace of enmity and destructive violence. Yasmin would neither confirm nor deny. On reflection, someone else counterproposed that singular sensation might rather be an allegory of male-female relations, locked in a bitter embrace of enmity and destructive violence. Kinesis is the new mimesis because it is a particularly powerful kind of mimetic process, the kind that imitates an idea and emotion, not only an action or even an inchoate impulse, but a structure of relations. Moving angrily away from each other as if to escape their erotic fates, the dancers in singular sensation were snapped back together by the shredded pantyhose that tethered them together, plighting their miserable troughs. Less for the better, more for the worse, till death cuts the rayon threads, sending the male dancers sprawling and cartwheeling across the stage. At this suggestion about male and female violence, Yasmin laughed and laughed some more, and then turned and slugged her boyfriend in the arm hard. He nearly fell out of the chair. I took that as a yes. Opio Koch brought us two North American premieres, Border Express and No Man's Gone Now, here pictured. It's a collaboration with Julian Hamilton, a British-based choreographer based in London. The voiceover narration of No Man's Gone is about place, ostensibly Kenya, which slowly, subtly, but unmistakably undoes the Western cliches about East Africa that resonate in our eyes and ears from Meryl Streep's performance in Out of Africa. I had a farm in Africa. Opio sends up nostalgia without memory by proving nostalgia isn't what it used to be. Opio lives in a more cosmopolitan reality, which he danced even more explicitly in his second piece for the festival, Border Express. Opio's cross-rhythmic virtuosity developed an important kinesthetic genealogy. Opio's moves combined some East African motives with others that were recognizably American postmodern from the heady days of Judson Church. Yvonne Rainer, key progenitor of postmodern dance, gasped out loud when she recognized the movement style of her erstwhile colleague Steve Paxton in flat and backwater twosome from the 1970s, especially in Opio's focused, calm, deliberate movement with a straight spine. We learned, to our dance historians' delight, but not to our total surprise, that Julian Hamilton, Opio's London collaborator, studied with Steve Paxton and is known as the Steve Paxton of Britain. And what form was communicated over the decades and 3 continents in the medium of muscle and bone? Precisely this. There is a line, a certain line. None could be more rigorous. What is this line? This line is Opio making a line with his body. It is not his body alone, of course. There's that duality again, except as the instrument, as the stylus. It is the line that he is making with his mind-body by balancing his entire idea on the ball of one foot. No, it is not his mind-body alone, but an arabesque that began in Steve Paxton's toes in New York, arrived in Opio's torso in Nairobi, having passed through Julian Hamilton's pelvis in London. And what do we see arriving over time and space in the mobile chiaroscuro of this most hospitable body? First, that certain special line stands still, vertically, pivoting slowly to clarify its heart-stopping shape in the light and the astonished air. Then, miraculously, Opio makes the line move, back and forth across the stage, but without ever breaking, without it ever severing the intimate lover's bond between his idea, their idea, and our held breaths, curving, rippling, bending, extending, but never breaking. A mirage, a wave, a flame. We sponsored Yvonne Rayner's ROS Indexical, a truly delicious send-up of the pseudo-ethnography of Rite of Spring, and commissioned Spiraling Down, which had its world premiere in New Haven, in collaboration with our Los Angeles partners, the Getty Museum and the Red Cat Theater at the Roy and Edmund Disney Center in LA. I won't describe these dances, but simply say that it is our contention that the artistic value of the creative work and research outcomes are interdependent. Our work in this, along with the Red Cat and the Getty, won the Best Performance Prize from the World Performance, from the Art Critics Association, sponsored by UNESCO. Like the companies we book, we write together as we make dance theater work together, collectively, collaboratively, experimentally, and polyvocally. We seek to change the way in which performance scholarship is created, published, and evaluated. To that end, we have already moved beyond the single author model of traditional humanistic scholarship. Ultimately, all of us who participate in the project sign the article and share in the credit as well as the labor of producing it. And here I interject that when I went on a year's leave to the Huntington, I used my grant to replace myself with Tommy DeFrance, with the intention of bringing him to Yale permanently. To Yale for that. Congratulations. Adam Horowitz and Amy Rosenblum, two Yale College undergraduate oral historians, documented the background to their work and ours over the life of the Mellon Grant. I found that assigning Yale undergraduates as the interviewers to the artists let the artists open up and say things to these extraordinary young men and women that they would say to me. We're making this material available even as we continue to mine it ourselves for future publications, making an archive out of our repertoire and vice versa. The collection will be housed in the Beinecke in an online presence, and we paid the artists well, and in return, just as I signed a release form to the Franklin Center, the artists signed a release form that their work is available to scholars without difficulties of copyright and intellectual property. This is the moment when we come to working in the undergraduates into the whole project. Probably the most fun we had was doing our own musical called Don't Look Back, the Temptations standard, which was our Orpheus. But I wanted to start this by showing that out of this research together with our students, we publish it as a signed article, and the design. But the production itself was called Project O as a seminar that we ran. And we did it in the spring of 2008. And we set it in the Teen-A-Rama dance parties from the 1950s and 1960s, American Bandstand, which was in some ways the thin end of the wedge of the civil rights movement. And it's the first time you saw mixed couples, not the couples themselves mixed, but a racially mixed dance floor. So much so that the first time it was tried on the Philadelphia affiliate, all of the southern stations canceled their subscription to the program. We tried to recreate that moment in the moment of the race between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton through the primaries, in which the generational difference between the Yale students and me was crushing. I was of use to them in this sense. I was the only one with muscular memory of the twist. Choreographers took it off of the old videos and transferred it to the students. But to really get the essence of it, they had to be told that to do it properly, you had to move your feet in opposition like this, as if putting out cigarette butts, while wiping your ass with a towel at the same time. And only that transmission across time, the full research essays for kinesthetic imagination to assert themselves. But the results of this collision of students who thought of themselves, who wanted to think of themselves, who believed themselves to be post-racial, and those of us with a longer memory of the history that was coming to us. The word "don't look back" resonated again and again. So I've told you what I'm going to tell you, and now I'm going to tell you what I just told you. That kinesis is the new mimesis, that polyrhythm mimics polyvocality, and that polyvocality mimics hospitality. And on that note of hospitality, I just want to thank you for yours today, for coming out today, and for welcoming me so kindly. Thank you very much.
So we do have some time for questions. From the audience, please. So I might start. That was absolutely extraordinary. Can you talk about two things? One, a little bit more about your sense of friction. About your sense of friction and how you're working with Anna Singh's notion of friction, because the friction is both kind of that point of hesitation, but somewhat in her work also the willingness to experiment with a new universal of some sort. And clearly part of what I understand that frictive moment for you to be is to be both pausing about it, but also being willing to posit some claims that are comprehensive in their scope, even in the formulation of kinesis being the new mimesis. So maybe friction in particular. And then within that, if there are elements that strike you as something like a resistant vernacularities within a kinesthetic mimesis. A vernacular that's resistant to the broader formulation. If there are moments in any of the particular projects where something didn't quite fit the formula, where something that just had a vernacular quality emerging from its particular internal performance history that kind of confounded your ability to incorporate it within the project as a whole, or the kind of the theoretical work that you're trying to do with the project as a whole.
Yeah, those are both good questions. On the first, what we found is we were using, as we inevitably had to because of our training and of our experience as art makers and directors and choreographers, the experience of production, which is of course fraught with friction. A sculptor tends to work alone. A painter is accountable to himself. Performing artists work in groups, and there isn't always a complete amity, a complete unity of vision about what's to be done, particularly in the theater and to some extent like it in dance, although dance is closer to music. I'm saying that music where you have a inscription system of notation that's intelligible. But in forms where you don't have this notation, there's so much room for negotiation and misunderstanding within negotiation and friction that ensues from the work. And we wanted to take those experiences and try to understand them in the context of art work that is circulating and being performed out of its context in different places. And especially when we bring it to our place, and in trying to make a hospitable atmosphere to welcome our guests, failing in certain ways. And that comes from very practical ways. The kind of thing that comes up in any theatrical situation. The Czechs walked into the university theater at Yale and said, "We can't work in this space, we need a four-stage." And they, I guess, hadn't looked at the floor plan, so we had to build a four-stage overnight. So, fortunately, it isn't beyond the ken of the Yale Repertory Theater technicians. They're extraordinary. They were able to do this. But within that meeting was a certain European and European avant-garde set of preconceptions about working with other people, and it collided with North American expectations, and the whole process was a negotiation, even while we were putting on this play about labor and its transportation and its removal and its exploitation in around. So as the Czechs are singing of the exploited Czech workers globally, the technicians of the Yale Rep are falling exhausted, having spent all night building the stage for them. And we ended up as industrial managers of the most, almost like the Sadler Report, Victorian 24-hour working day, imposing on others what we were complaining about in our theater piece. So I guess what I'm saying is there's a constant testing of your academic and theoretical ideas against the materiality, the resistant materiality of performance, the limits of the human body, the limits of the material around you, so that your theories have to be matched against what a world is pushing back at you, and hence friction. And was there a vernacular that resisted our attempts to assimilate it? I suppose the most fraught instance was veiled monologues, where you had a deeply controversial and to some extraordinarily offensive sexual ethnography. And the actresses, though Muslim, were Turks. And to many Muslims in our community, that just in some ways didn't count. And so there was a real pushback against what we had done, and a bitter and painful after effect of having produced this work. And that videotape of that symposium is as dramatic as anything we've put on the stage as a performance. And is that vernacular?
That's vernacular.
Maureen.
Perhaps I missed it, but I was wondering if China is on my mind. I'm going off.
Time?
China. Time too. But before time, China is on my mind. And I was wondering if you had invited any Chinese troops to come through.
We did not.
Interesting.
And that wasn't an intentional omission, it just simply the fate of our booking. We never were able to connect with a company. We had a Japanese theater company.
I know.
in
It's
Singapore,
interesting,
but not
one
China.
of the reasons why I asked is I just told Kathy, sitting next to me, that when you were talking about the UN, intangible heritage sites,
Yeah.
the place where Duke has decided and is now currently building a campus, Kunshan, China, is in fact, and Claire would be able to explain much more about it than I, is in fact, has just been designated an intangible heritage site for the development of
Kunshu
Kunshu Opera, which is the Peony Pavilion, which I just saw last night. I'm struck. I want to ask how you felt about the no boundaries, the fact that you were inviting people to come to the first world to display their art. They said there was no boundaries, but other people said, no, you have real boundaries because you've asked us to come here rather than going out. I'm wondering if there's any, if you could talk for a moment about that sense of where the university, the humanities might
Right.
lie.
Well, to be the impresario of such an endeavor is to be constantly embarrassed. Embarrassed by one's own imperialism and commerciality. I mean, I love to see those audiences in the theater. I love to sell the tickets. The managerial part of it is something that I do and is important to me. And then you get into the sense of, all right, what does it mean? Well, these are mostly performers who obviously they've designed this to be touring. They know what they're doing. They know what they're signing when they sign our releases. But in some cases, there's a real asymmetry of power and position. Of course there is. One feels that. And one also feels that sense of ethnographic display. That's why I started with Peru Negro, which was very intensely had the feeling of National Geographic about it. Even though it is not a folk art in the sense of a long-time indigenous local practice, it's a nightclub act. But what is under that is this extraordinary musical and kinesthetic tradition that propels what they call the Black Pacific, the Peruvian Afro-diasporic community. And that's what we're retailing through CAMI, Colombia Artist Management. And what does it mean to put that on a bus and truck and to take it around so that there are that many performances in different places for audiences, some of them uncomprehending. The gratifying thing for us was the audience was really in on it for the most part because it was predominantly Peruvian or from the region who knew a lot about the form. But everything is fraught. That's one of the things that we were aware of and took on as a responsibility to bring these things. What I tried to do was pay them well.
Very good.
Joe, just to follow up on Maureen's question, is there a sense in which, because sometimes with cultural exchange projects, when one group goes to another country and performs, then it ends, and there's a lot of warm feelings as well as the kinds of frictions that have emerged. But then there's that sense of what next, and the idea of, will these artists keep in touch with each other or with you at Yale? And so in the sense of piggyback on Maureen's sense of the boundaries and which direction the travel is going and the resources are going, is there a follow-up plan, or was it kind of a festival atmosphere, a one-time thing, and then everybody goes back to where they came from?
The follow-up is now the main thing that has come of this is I've been able to retain Emily as a dancer and her collaborator Lasso Koulibaly from Burkina Faso. Together they've created a dance ensemble that melds West African and modern dance with her balletic tradition. And they've already been commissioned by the Memphis Ballet to do their piece here or anywhere. And Lasso is teaching West African dance for us. Emily is teaching range of dance courses. We've been able to preserve that so far. But it's, I think, issue in doubt. It's because I've been raising this money, and I don't know how much longer that can that's sustainable. So there has to be an institutional commitment to it, or it's going to go away. But Lasso came as part of this original touring commission kind of thing, and has stayed with us as a dance faculty member, teaching for the first time in Yale's history of West African dance, and very successfully. So every semester is a new adventure. Yes?
Yes, first, thank you. That was just a great paper, and I'm sorry I'm going to have to rush out and don't get to talk to you later, but thanks so much for being here. I moved down here about 20 years ago, and the most astonishing thing to me was that in Durham, North Carolina, the summer was taken over by the American Dance Festival.
Yeah.
And not only are there dancers performing, but there's 300 students from around the world, and there's classes. So I've been able to take classes every year and see these dancers who were babies then become Shinwei and other very famous dancers.
Right.
One thing I found very interesting, it just resonated so much with what you were talking about, is I don't think I've ever been here any year where I haven't gone to one of the dancer parties where they've been able to deconstruct not only each other's works from a global perspective and from all the, but their own work in a way that, so we were talking about shame and the binary when you were talking about Ian's question about insider, outsider, and boundaries and shames. I think being a dancer is partly also about embodying exactly and performing that sense of shame as part of the boundary of your own dancing and your own kind of limitation or inspiration for your own dancing. And it's something that I've been able to see, again, I don't think that's ever not happened. Sometimes painfully, where the different dancers who are performing will critique the dancers who are more senior than they are, or choreographing their own dances.
Right.
But that introspection seems to be very much part of the vocabulary of dance movement and dance teaching and dance inheritance. I loved what you said about the feet, the pelvis, the spine being translated across those continents. That was really very powerful and moving.
Well, thank you, and thank you for pointing out this resource that you have right here. It comes to you. And
it's astonishing.
Amazing. And it's true that dancers have been very good, and I envy them in this, with workshops and residencies and putting their choreography on another company or on another set of dancers, so that there's that communication of choreographic language and style. And that is a lot more developed than it is in theater or even in music. It's a real richness, and you're lucky.
Yeah, and that critique, I think, is, because when you dance, you critique not just with words, but you actually physically get positioned and pushed and redistributed by each other and by the teacher. And there's something about that that's very, when you say no boundaries, that's both boundaries and no boundaries, right, at the same time.
Let me just finish off that point, if I can get this image up. This is part of the disaster. We decided that we would take Lasso and Emily's piece, the one that they were working on, and perform it unbidden in Grand Central Station. As you see, Officer Finelli and Officer Riley were into our experience. So we were seriously busted. But then Emily has been going to Burkina with Lasso and working there in the dance center in Ouagadougou. And the image you see here was part of my video that I messed up, but it's Fauzia, Lasso's daughter. And it's this extraordinary moment because Emily said to Fauzia, the daughter, Fauzia, do you dance? And she just smiled shyly. And Lasso, the father, said, she's too shy to dance. And Emily said, is that really true? And we have the video. Fauzia burst into this extraordinary riff, and her arms were Emily's arms because she'd been watching the rehearsal all day. And of course, it was, there was a bit of turnout, and her arms were in that Balanchine arc, but the movement style was all dad.
Nice.
specifically in your choice that I wanted to ask you of the term polyvocality. So if you could talk a little bit more about what you gain in choosing polyvocality over polyphony. Because what I'm wondering about is, it seems like something you lose in that shift is an equivalent to groove that you have in polyrhythm, and and it seems that the important work of showing how African and African diasporic arts and aesthetics should be in core, or are moving, are the core here. That it would be interesting. I'd like to hear what happens to groove in that move to polyvocality.
Well, I wanted to bring voice into it, and polyphony I think of as instrumental, and that's quite wrong, it could be vocal as well as anything, but it was the idea of vocality and the idea that you can have people talking at once and still making sense if your art form expressively can embody that. And it's like in opera where, unlike the drama, you can have up to, well, 4, maybe sometimes 6 people all talking at once and making sense at the same time. And there's something in that sense of the simultaneity and variety within that that was a kind of metaphor for what we were trying to do. Talking at once and still making sense, making space for other voices at the same time, which is the musical space of polyrhythm across rhythms. It's more metaphoric than theoretically rigorous, I confess.
I think we have time for one last question.
You were talking earlier about friction and process, and just I've been thinking that as all of us know who engage in that kind of collaborative process, friction can also frequently be fruitful, and wondering if there are particular instances of that that came up in the course of this project.
Yes, many times, and at every level, choosing the works. The selection process was extremely difficult because we could only operate in the interstices of the rep season. So they had to pick their 8 shows. And of course, that's constantly changing because somebody drops out, gets a movie contract, the bid. And so the dates would be changing while we're negotiating with several companies about when they can come. So there was a lot of friction just in putting this on. And then, of course, when you're actually doing the work, when the company arrives, you can get into that. But mostly, what you're talking about, I associate with the indigenous pieces that we did within our own student base at Yale, where we were working up these pieces that didn't fit in the usual repertoire of Yale College. Don't look back, we hadn't tried anything quite like that, at least in my memory of it. And that's where we really had productive and unproductive friction. That process, and particularly the generational struggle, I felt that very, very acutely. In 2008, the spring of 2008, I was a complete wreck, having lived through the spring of 1968. And the students just couldn't understand it. And the funny part of that came out in their reaction to the dances of the 1960s. Professor Roach, you just stood opposite your partner and did that? Already the variety of contemporary dance moves and forms are well embedded in their kinesthetic memory and imagination. So to encounter the hitchhike and the mashed potato just freaked them out. But that was just the kinesthetic part of a really deep rift across time and imagination from where we were in history. And this was a crucial failure, and this may get back to vernacular. This was an omission that I still can't believe I made. One of John O'Neill's most extraordinarily successful techniques is the story circle. You sit and the story passes around, and there are various ways of organizing that, but basically it's a story circle. And I never thought to use that technique, which I'd used previously, to get at the issues in this musical. I was so preoccupied with other things. And it was just unaccountable lapse in not using our own techniques, our own repertoire of ideas and practices to address what was a crucial problem that would have been, I think, illuminated by that. When we worked in New Orleans, we had our most successful story circle was on hair. All the things that hair can mean in New Orleans to the various people who own it and wear it, and comb it and manipulate it and remember it from various times in the history. And amazing research can come from those kinds of conversations. So there's a lot of things I'd do differently if I had it to do over again.
Let me thank Joe again. Thank all of you for being here. We do have our own small version of the kinesthetic move to hospitality. There's a reception outside, so please do.
Thank you, Ian.
Nuts and bolts. Yeah. I mean, I have a sense.
Been a long semester.
Yeah, I mean, I made this 1,000 words.
We said 2007, I guess he's right. I thought it was 2006.
Yes, go right ahead.
I'm checking everything. Okay.
Yeah.
So just text me?
Yes. Yeah, but I don't want you to get off. I just have one out of this.
No, you're good.
But like one is changing. But I mean, yes. But are you sure you're around?
You should start requiring. I will play these roles.
Oh, you put that one
I'll be back by there.
That's what I was talking about, the lady that goes in first thing in the morning.
Okay, I'll be around.
It's that room. You're the best, thanks. I'm worried because it's not gonna end up like the poster in the case.
No, this will make it fine.
You're like, what? I didn't understand. I'm not going to put you in the
No,
library.
this is quite clear. It's quite clear.
It's nice to hear people.
Display a lot of clarity.
Has no fucking respect.
Yeah.
Wouldn't have been fun to be around for that.
Oh.
Really?
Yeah, and so set up for it. I know.
Emily was really strong.
Okay, he's doing his sound class.
We wanted things.
So I ran into him. Did you feel like and he had
Of course.
actually
Of course.
classroom. Could you share his email, because I want to ask you if I can sit in on his class. And we had this whole conversation.
Right. Well,
He's so wonderful.
We do when we put on a free drama.
Well,
Fantastic, I love that. So interesting, he's very cool, and he had this sound reader, and I was like, wait, that's the book I need to read. So I know something, like when I'm teaching children, I can't tell what that sound of music is. I mean, and it's such a limitation.
Emily always wanted
You know, I can say things like, really great for this area. That's a beginning. That's a beginning.
Of course, yeah, and the connection between,
It was so funny, I had such a feeling of sadness and wistfulness when I just did enjoy the class. And then like an hour later, I had such joy. It's so
that makes sense.
I'm gonna meditate. I know I have to do some grading. I mean, I'm not.
But you don't really have to get out of your pajamas.
No.
Let's be in closer touch. Okay.
How are we doing? Have you contacted? We're trying to do a symposium on myths.
Yeah. Let me email you.
Are you sticking around during your time off? You ran into people that you guys are perhaps going to do jobs here and later, right?
Yeah.
That's exciting.
I didn't know that,
Actually, don't even ever run into jobs.
you've been seeing Rally.
Oh, I met he came to the Martha's
Everywhere, I mean, I'm on West Campus half the time, and then East Campus half the time, and they put my office all the way in your backyard.
And I guess.
Not anymore, no, they don't, I can't even remember the name of it. So
And that
abandoned.
another of them,
Actually, on
that they were poets.
No, that's right.
Yes.
Well, maybe I'll put Joe on.
Yeah, because I
And I teach an hour.
think, just the conversations that the two of them have,
Bus rider.
that's something.
Maybe they should have their own.
Oh my God.
Maybe I should have that.
Because it's because he just 19th century literature. But he was going steady. You know, I knew he was a poet, but then he got really excited talking about Dickinson and Whitman. I was like, wait a second.
Yeah, oh no, it was usually fun to, that would be such a great, I wish it would be such a good evening. Really good evening. Sadly, I don't know how long I'm gonna be able to.
I want to visit you.
Well, I can always play a student.
Okay, we'll keep doing it
Well-
for non-students. But it's a student
Yeah,
project.
but you've got him scheduled for January though. So
Yeah, good.
because we're beginning to work on something too.
Okay, so let's email about the other thing, in which at this point we'll just do in the fall. Or next
But I think,
spring.
yeah,
The human, I can't text that.
because in my mind, it's had to grow a little bit.
Okay.
It's film class, so at least there'll be parts of it.
Do all these things, but haven't had my key.
I need to. You know, it was so funny, I had asked you to invite
No, you would not want, no, you wouldn't want to codify,
and
you know, what is.
said she was gonna leave the keys in my box.